Welcome to Branding Innovators, a live video podcast series event coming to you from the Creative and Tech Podcast Show, powered by ReadSpeaker.ai. I am your host and moderator for this event. My name is Carrie Roberts, and I am the brand evangelist for North America at ReadSpeaker.ai. And this morning, we are having a chat about brand, what the research shows, and why it matters. And joining me today for this conversation is psychologist and a faculty member at the Masters in Branding program at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, Tom Guarriello. I am so excited you're here. Thank you for joining us, Tom.
Well, thanks for having me, Carrie. I'm excited to be here.
So you and I met about a year ago. We had an incredibly interesting conversation. So of course, you're one of the first people I thought of to be a part of this event for us. Before we get into the research, I just want to check in with you first. You've been in this branding space, this psychology space for a long time. You have an interest in innovation and robotics. What is it exciting about for this space? What is it about branding and innovation that you get so excited and passionate about for you personally?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a psychologist, and so I've always been interested in the way we think and feel and act. And I started off as a clinical psychologist many years ago, many years ago. The gray hair will tip you off to that. And I became interested in brands when I started working in the fashion industry. I became a consultant to fashion brands and started to see that the role that fashion in particular plays in mostly the work that I've done, lives was psychologically very interesting. And that got me into a study of the relationships that we people establish with objects. And so I've been a branding consultant now for the last 20 plus years. And as you say, for the last 12 years now, I've been teaching a class. My capstone class at the School of Visual Arts is called The Meaning of Branded Objects. And it's really about the psychological processes that enable the establishment of relationships between people and objects. And as a technologist, excuse me just one second, as a technologist, I became fascinated with robots because our relationships with those objects are also very special because we treat them as if we're not sure exactly, they're not human, but they're not objects. What are they? So about almost 6 years ago now, I started a podcast called the RoboPsych podcast to explore human-robot interaction as another way of looking at this space of people and things.
Which is why you're here, because of that combination, which is exciting. I am asking everyone this question, and the very basic question is, how do you define brand?
Well, for me, a brand is a set of cognitive and emotional associations to an object, a service, or a concept. And it's very easy to demonstrate. Think about what comes to mind when I say these three words: Tesla, Uber, QAnon. Now, those are three brands, and we don't often necessarily think about concepts as branded, but in fact, concepts were really the origin of brands. And so that set of associations, what I think of as a meaning cloud that essentially surrounds an object or a service or a concept, is the brand.
Yes, I agree. And as you were talking and you said each of those, immediately an image or a name or a few names came to mind. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And I want to go through a little bit. Again, you are an academic, you are a psychologist, you're a professor. I want to go through a little bit of the history of brand. When you and I spoke about a year ago, you had said to me that one of the original people that kind of spoke about brand was related to Sigmund Freud. Which was really fascinating to me. So I'd love if you could take us through, where did this idea of brand start, maybe especially within the US, and then kind of how has it evolved over the years?
Sure. Well, the original if you will, the original process of associating something with something else which is really what branding is at its very core, started with religion. Religious symbols were kind of the original, if you will, expressions of concepts. And so the cross, the the Star of David, the yin yang symbol, the swastika as a Hindu symbol. So these ideas that these things stand for these things was established thousands of years ago. And so we became used to the idea of a symbol. A symbol comes from the Greek word symbolon, which means to throw things together or an outward sign of something. And so culturally, historically, the notion of this meaning that was established a long, long time ago. And then the word brand itself comes from the old Norse word brander, which means to burn. And so originally, that word was used to describe a tool, which, we know that a branding iron was used in order to mark possessions, right? To say, this is my cow. This is my land. I have this symbol that stands for my ranch, my whatever. And so, again, cultural evolution being what it is, gradually those signs started to become associated with not just the thing, like not just the cow, but also the characteristics of the thing. So the cows that have this symbol have great milk. And we buy the milk that comes from the cows that have that brand, right? So those kinds of the movement now to identify the symbol with the characteristics of the object started to become normative within culture, so that gradually we started to find that things could be um, quickly communicated by virtue of these symbols. And, the first trademarks were started in England, and the very first trademark, interestingly enough, the very first trademark was for Bass Ale. So alcohol, that red triangle was very early in the trademark world. And so it became very clear that is a symbol of these characteristics of this product. And quickly then, products started to adopt quick visual ways of expressing their identity. And that expression, those trademarks, logos, symbols, became meaning carriers. Oh, that's this kind of beer. This is this kind of car. This is this kind of whatever. And as soon as you are thinking about what things mean, this means that, you are immediately into the world of psychology, right? And so, as you mentioned, one of the fascinating quirks of history is that Sigmund Freud's nephew, an American by the name of Edward Bernays, was, first of all, um, one of the fathers of public relations. And so his discipline, his strength was in persuading and changing public opinion. And he was very taken by Uncle Sigmund's work. And so he began to utilize some of Freud's principles in um, persuading people to do things. And so, for example, one of his initial campaigns was in 1920, I guess, right after the amendment giving women the vote. He had an event in Central Park, in which he had a client. Bernays always had clients. He had a client that was a cigarette company. And at the time, women smoking was not culturally acceptable for women in public, particular. This is right at the beginning of the 20s. And so, what Bernays did was to stage an event in which he got fashion models to line up in Central Park and to light up cigarettes. And um, the key element was changing the name of the cigarette to Torches of Freedom. So now, suddenly, the cigarette became a symbol for women, psychologically for freedom. And of course, smoking for women took off. And it was a front page New York Times story the next day. Pictures of these models lining up and smoking cigarettes, torches of freedom. Um, so I guess what I wanted to say is that this intertwining of psychology and branding goes back really to the beginning, certainly to the beginning of the 20th century. And what that meant was that brands gradually became integrated into personal identity, so that you had a company like General Motors, for example. Now, General Motors, they didn't just make cars, they made Chevrolets, Oldsmobiles, Cadillacs, let's say, those three. Well, Chevrolets had a personal identity set of qualities about it. Not only price, that was one thing, but also the meaning of the Chevrolet, kind of the the common working man's car, good quality. The Oldsmobile, slightly more sophisticated, slightly more successful. Oh, the Cadillac, the pinnacle, right, of early capitalism success. So the idea of brands becoming now more closely associated with personal characteristics and also, if you will, social identity. This is really the most important dimension that started to happen because brands started to grow groups of followers, people who would say things like, I'm a Chevrolet person. I'm a Ford person. You would actually hear people say these kinds of things so that the integration of the brand with the identity became a normal part of American life in that first half of the 20th century.
Well, I appreciate you going back. And I think it is fascinating that, branding isn't this new concept. It's been around for centuries. And that mesh of psychology is equally important. As you said early on, we have a feeling or an association to a certain word of things. So I really like that. I think when we are thinking about brand today, especially in the last year and a half during the pandemic, a lot of things have changed. What would you say in terms of what the research has shown, either over the years or fairly recently, in terms of what makes a great brand?
Well, I'm a qualitative researcher. And so I get to talk to people about the meaning of brands and where they fit in people's lives and how important they are to them. And what's interesting to me, one of the things that's interesting to me, many things are fascinating about talking to people about brands, but many of the things that are interesting is that people are oddly reluctant to talk about their brand loyalties. And I think we are oddly reluctant about that because we believe that we are supposed to make decisions rationally. And buying something because of its brand somehow feels like it's not rational. In fact, we tease people. We say, oh, he's an Apple fanboy, right? To which I plead guilty, by the way. Um, and it's a term of derision, so that people who are strongly loyal to brands are a little reluctant to talk about that. However, when you do qualitative research with people about their brand preferences and about their favorites and about the things that matter to them, when you look around your life and you say, what are the objects that matter most in my life? What are, like the song said, what are a few of my favorite things? What are they? You will find that each of those things has a story wrapped around it. And very often that story is integrated with the story of the brand. So um, we know that great brands create cultures. These uh, sets of characteristics and qualities that the owners of the object are embracing. Tesla owners are not just buying a car; they're buying something else. They're making a statement about who they are and what they believe, and what they believe the car is saying about transcendent values like the future of the planet. And so the object is no longer just simply an object. Now, for some people, a car is just a car. And so when you talk to them about a car, you talk to someone who buys a Toyota. I've had Toyotas, I love Toyotas, but you talk to a person who buys a Toyota and you are likely to get reasons for buying the Toyota that are predominantly practical and functional. Great gas mileage, inexpensive. Um, it's big enough for my whole family. I like the cup holders, very functional kinds of rationale for buying the car. Very different than when you talk to someone who buys a Tesla. Very different than when you talk to someone who buys a Mercedes, right? For whom now the meaning of that object is much more social and perhaps even more emotional. I'm a successful person. I deserve to have the rewards of success. And, once again, these are the kinds of qualitative insights that it takes some time to um, encourage people to talk about, because we are a little shy about talking about these non-rational elements that fit into that determine our choices. Now, it doesn't have to be a car for something to have lots of meaning. I mean, uh, a sweater, a pair of shoes, a loaf of bread. You can buy a loaf. So you say to somebody, "You're going to go buy a loaf of bread. What kind of bread are you going to buy?" "Oh, I'm going to buy a loaf of white bread." Now, a loaf of white bread is a statement that has cognitive, emotional, social connotations to it. Think about what you think of when you see someone who said, "Oh, I'm going to buy a loaf of white bread." "Oh, Wonder Bread. Huh? Who is the person who buys Wonder Bread today? That's interesting. What is it about Wonder Bread that makes it appealing to you?" "Well, my kids like it." "Oh, I see. So the bread is designed to do a particular kind of job of making your children eat bread that maybe an artisanal whole grain, multi-grain, crusty bread would not be successful at doing." So the meaning of the object is only can only really be appreciated by exploring it with the individual. Now, we know from a quantitative standpoint, quantitative research in branding is everywhere. If you go to a site, um, hang on a second. There's a great site that I want your listeners to take a look at. It's called stackline.com. Stackline.com. Now, when you go to Stackline, you will see by category searches that people make on a whole range of sites: Google, Amazon, shopping sites, all kinds of things, for all sorts of categories of products and for all specific products. So that's where you get to see the kind of quantitative research that's being done that tells you about trends, about the kinds of preferences that people have. Remember, Google became what it's become by virtue of being a an important step in capturing intention. If I go on Google and I put in basketball shoes as a search term, there's a decent chance that I'm going to convert by basketball shoes. And the basketball shoe brands that are recommended to me by Google, first of all, have paid for positioning. But second of all, are also, after you get by the ones that are ads, you get to the ones that have been most commonly searched for. So the amount of quantitative research on what makes a great brand is about those kinds of numbers. But for me, the qualitative insights about what makes a great brand is all about the strength of the associations that the brand elicits for people. Um, you know, all you have to do is say Harley Davidson, and you know that there is a set of associations that are very powerful. You cannot, and of course, what Harley has done has been to create a whole set of signifiers that stand for that brand. Everything from that orange and black logo to the sound of that engine to the shape of the motor, the gas tank on. I mean, everything about the brand is designed to express the brand's identity and personality. And so the stronger those associations are, the more the greater the brand and the more the brand is worth.
Yes, I always love when people kind of talk about the value of qualitative research. I remember when you and I spoke about a year ago, you talked about, quantitative is good for maybe demographics or certain things, but you had said qualitative is really about the why. You gave the example of somebody having a brand that has a scent and people not buying it because it stinks. And you wouldn't know that through quantitative, but qualitative is where you really find what's working for a brand and what isn't. Can you talk to that a little bit more?
Sure, what you get when you talk to people is nuance. And so when people say, so for example, people say, I like that brand. I like that brand. Oh, I like that brand. You experience the emotional connection of the person with the brand, and the subtle things like, I don't really, it stinks in that store. I don't like to go in that store. It does, like, okay, that is an insight that the owners of that store, who may think that they are appealing in a sensory way to the customer, are actually, now there may be enough customers who like that scent that they're willing to have the people who think it stinks not come in and shop. So nuance is a qualitative phenomenon, and you only find that out through qualitative research. And this is actionable research. So, for example, with when when a brand like Tesla is associated with a set of transcendent values, sustainability, um, um, responsibility, personal responsibility. I think of it as being good for me and good for us. Those are kind of values that brands can communicate Well, take a look at a brand like Peloton, for example. Peloton is good for me by virtue of enabling my health and physical well-being, as long as my kids don't get caught up in the treadmill, and good for us because it has a whole set of transcendent values that it is associating itself with. Patagonia is a great example of how, this isn't just a jacket. This is a statement of meaning about my relationship with the world and with others who have that logo on their jacket. We are part of a community that stands for these important things. And what a brand like Patagonia wants to do is to learn even more about the nuances of their relationships with their customers so that they can emphasize those and let the customers know that they hear them and that they know what they stand for.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like you said, a great brand not only creates these associations, but it does build some sort of community or some sort of association for yourself. I think about, the brands that I purchase and why I continue to purchase and what they mean to me stands for more, like you said, than just the actual product. We obviously you talked about in the beginning, the visual logo was so important in terms of history. We now kind of have migrated into adding on to brand in terms of the audio component. So whether that is a sonic brand or maybe that's a customized voice, we're looking at a lot of things like voice technology. We're seeing AR and VR. We're seeing all this kind of innovation. Where do you think like brand fits within all of this? How do you showcase a brand in terms of things like voice technology or audio or other areas that maybe we haven't thought about in the way they need to be thought about now with the way things are going?
Well, we are sensory physical beings. And so the more sensory cues that a brand can create and associate with its identity, the stronger the brand becomes. I still have rolling around in my head jingles from toothpaste ads in the 1950s to brands, and I can't get them out of my head. They're stuck. They're earworms that are always there. And that's what brands want to do. Intel had that chime, that Intel Inside chime that it associated with the brand. The Apple boot chime is one that every Apple Mac owner immediately associates with the brand. It is it's a harmony that's been created in order to let you know this is your world. This sound is your world. Now that we are moving into virtual space, brands, of course, are going to utilize every new technology. Brands from the very beginning of time, newspapers, radio. Remember, radio, the only reason radio was important was because brands put shows on the radio called soap operas. And they were called soap operas because they sold soap. They were sponsorship for soap, right? And so that technology got utilized for branding. Television was all about branding. Why was television free? Why were television shows free? Well, they were free because the sponsors wanted to use the programs to sell their product. I remember watching dancing packages of Chesterfield cigarettes on comedy shows, and there'd be girls dancing inside of dancing with a jingle. So, well, that's the same thing that's going to happen in every virtual reality world. You already see, in metaverses like Decentraland and Fortnite and all of the the beginnings of metaverse integration. You already see brands utilizing the technology because they know they have to be in those worlds. Why are there virtual Hermes scarves? Because people want their avatar to be wearing an Hermes scarf, and they'll pay real money for them. They'll pay real money for Air Jordans for their avatar to wear around in Fortnite, because brand connection with identity is very important. And brands know that they have to be particularly where the young users are. Um, uh, you know, Connections with brands get established very early in life. Preferences very often get established early. And so getting to getting into people's brand cloud now, not just the meaning of one brand, but a whole constellation of brands. These are my brands. These are not my brands, right? So getting into those consideration sets of those brands early is very important. Where is that going to happen now? It's going to happen in online AR, VR. And again, because we are sensory beings, sounds, smells, textures, looks, colors are all ways that brands need to communicate in order to be memorable and powerful.
Yes, I appreciate you saying that. I think you're right. It's always about this kind of experience that we're having. And it's interesting that you said, even if we're doing something virtually, we want to look, feel, and sound like either how we do in person or maybe how we wish we were. So even our avatar, we want it to sound like us. We want it to look like us. We want it to have, like you said, the type of shoes or the type of hair or the type of voice that really resembles the person we want to be or we want to be associated with. So I agree, and it'll be interesting to see how we start to see brands go more into that. I know we are seeing some, as you mentioned, some in video games. We are definitely going to be seeing a lot more of that. Are there any other ways? And if anyone is, those of you that are watching, I know Peter is here watching from Germany. Audrey is here as well. If any of you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat and we will ask them in the last few minutes. Are you seeing any other type of technologies or companies that are kind of using these innovative spaces to showcase a brand that we haven't talked about yet? Or maybe ways that you think brands should be thinking about how to use technology and stay innovative?
Well, there's a lot of controversy about the ways that our preferences are shaped online. And not just Facebook, but Facebook as an example of the kinds of recommendations that are made based upon insights into our behavior and our preferences, much of which we are not consciously aware of. We are not consciously aware of most of what we've been talking about this morning. Most of this happens at the level where some of it can be accessed through in-depth conversation, but some of it is deeper than that. And we can't actually get to the true roots of the desire. Remember, in the branding business, we're in the desire business. We are in the business of creating desire individually, and we're in the business of creating something called mimetic desire. Desire based upon the things, as you mentioned, the things that I would like to be like, that I would like to have, based on the people who I admire and what they have. And so, it's no surprise that the people who buy Ford F-150s probably live in a world that is rich with Ford F-150s. And that world creates the mimetic desire, the meme of Ford F-150s being the thing that symbolizes me and we, right? Becomes a very powerful desire uh, generator, an engine of desire. And so we have become more aware through um, movies and through lots of exposés about the ways that our choices have been. Let's take it all the way from influence to manipulated by online and other means. And this is a troubling development for many of us because it it leads us to be suspicious, skeptical of what's happening. Who yeah, and you hear this phrase a lot. My their goal, the goal of AI is to know me better than I know myself. Well, that's not a very comforting thought. It isn't comforting to have an idea that, well, this thing knows me better than I know myself. Now, on the one hand, I find that pretty appealing. I want to have an agent that knows what I want based upon what it knows about me, that I have given it permission to know about me, and that I have given it missions to accomplish. Go find all the publications in the last month that have to do with the psychology of branding that are credible. Now go ahead, search all the literature, go find that stuff and bring it back to me. That would be great, right? I mean, this is uh this is Iron Man's dream, right? Is to have, this kind of Jarvis character that can go and find, and yet that is also a nightmare. Here we have this thing that knows me and knows what I want and can read my facial expressions and can deduce my true emotional state from the tone of my voice and all. So we are at one and the same time frightened and attracted to technologies, and so brands have to be cautious about utilizing technologies that are going to frighten the customer and make the customer more wary of interacting. What you want to do is to indicate that you understand the customer, and that you know what the customer's life is like, and that you know that your product or service can make their life better, but you don't want to have that be too disconcerting.
Yeah, I know when you and I spoke once before, talking about this idea that when we think of AI or robots or things of that nature, that people have a cultural association with them. And you talk about kind of different generations. You talk about kids today, they grew up with a lot of these things. So it's not weird for them. They feel very comfortable and will, in many cases, expect that there's a lot of AI in their future. For maybe my age group, where when I first think of robot, I might think of iRobot, the movie with Will Smith, and that was kind of a negative feeling against that. And
Yeah.
then for your generation, it's different. So you're right. I think when we're talking about technology and innovation and AI, part of our due diligence is also making sure that people don't feel afraid. Do you have any examples of how to kind of change our perception of the brand of AI or of technology, if we are feeling kind of this kind of cultural association that has happened over time?
I think we have to be much more aggressive in educating people as to what AI can do and what it can't do. And I think we have to demonstrate use cases where the ideal combinations, for example, in the workplace of the near future, augmented humans are going to be the most productive workers. Augmented humans doesn't mean that I have robotic arms. It means that I work alongside a machine, just as I work alongside a typewriter and I work alongside and with a computer, I'm going to be working alongside an AI generated tool of some kind that is going to collaborate with me, and that we are going to together use our unique skills to get things done better than either of us could have gotten them done alone. So we're working on, we meaning the world of AI development, are working on ways to make those partnerships more solid and more productive. And then, to um, demystify. This is one of the places where the military has really been at the forefront of using um, robot technologies to find and diffuse improvised explosive devices, for example, and human robot IED disposal teams have been extremely successful. And it's those kinds of examples, I think, that we're going to be looking at. Certainly in the healthcare field, we're going to be seeing human physician AI collaborations that are going to speed up diagnosis, that are going to recommend effective therapies. When you think about the amount of information being generated in medical fields today, it's impossible for a human physician, even in the tiniest specialties, to stay current. Well, if your AI is out there looking for what you need to know, and you can then collaborate in a clinical setting with that AI to provide therapeutic services, now we've raised the level of care dramatically. So I think those are the kinds of examples that we're going to be looking for, and that will demystify some of it. And as you said, generationally, those of us who were born in an era when, a robot was, a Terminator, are going to be replaced by children who grew up where a robot was Big Hero 6, or something even more welcoming and cooler.
Yes, no, I appreciate that. We are almost finished here with our time. I do want to bring an audience question from PK. He says, in today's environment where we are inundated with branding everywhere, how can we brand ourselves in a way that we can differentiate ourselves to bring important value to an audience?
Well, this is one of the issues that we all have to come to terms with today, in that the notion of personal branding is something that didn't exist uh, 10 years ago. Let's say it just began to exist. And I think the strongest path to personal branding is to accentuate your uniqueness. What is it that what is it about your background? What is it about your insights? What is it about your way of interacting with other people, which is one that, is very important. Technical skills are great, but it's the non-technical skills that often are the key to personal branding. Information is going to be readily available to people. It's how you take information and shape it to meet a particular individual or client's needs. That's where your personal branding that's what it can build on. So look for your areas of uniqueness and try to find a job that doesn't have a name. If you can do something that doesn't currently have a name, and you have to say, well, I do these things, not I'm a plumber. I am someone who can come into your environment and evaluate all of your water flows, and to see what we can do to minimize your water footprint, and that doesn't quite have a name yet. You might say it's a plumber, but it's a plumber who understands that there's a new way to be a plumber that's going to be different from the old way of being a plumber.
I like it. I appreciate all your insight, Tom. This has been wonderful. If people want to learn more about anything we spoke about or they want to connect with you, where is the best place to do that?
LinkedIn is the easiest place to connect with me. I'm in the process of finishing a book, which I will be speaking more about on LinkedIn. Please come and visit our School of Visual Arts Masters in Branding program website to learn more about our program. It's a great program. We're very proud of it. And thanks very much, Kerry, for the chance to sit down and speak with you about these things.
Yes, I appreciate it so much. If you are watching and listening and you want to see more videos we've done in the past, you can check out our Read Speaker AI YouTube page, as well as our audio podcast, Creative and Tech, wherever you listen to podcasts. And the rest of our day and tomorrow we'll be continuing with this series. Thank you so much, and we will see you in a bit.